Welcome to Draft Day Academy, a new video series where we'll be walking you through everything from basic tips and strategies to new features for the latest Wolverine Studios releases. I'm C. Jackson Cowart, the community manager here at Wolverine Studios, and in this video we'll be detailing everything you should know about skill ratings in Draft Day Sports College Basketball 2022, the newest release by Wolverine Studios. This is a video that I've been excited about for a while now, as skill ratings have been somewhat of a mystery to many community members for as long as I can remember. So if you're a longtime veteran of this game, or if you're discovering the game for the first time, I think you'll find something new and interesting to learn in this video. Let's jump right into it. As you'll remember from the last video about getting started with Draft Day Sports College Basketball 2022, we decided to take over as the head coach of the Charlotte Miners. Let's take a look at our roster. On the left, you'll see every player on the roster, as well as their position and number. To the right, you'll see every player's overall and potential ratings on a scale from 1 to 5 stars. And between those two is a full breakdown of every player's skill ratings, which helps shape the playing style and success for every player on the court. Keep in mind that what you see here isn't necessarily their true ratings, but rather your coaching staff's best guess at their ratings based on their own scouting ability. If you want to see a player's true ratings, you can enter Commissioner mode at the top right and edit players from there. But if you're playing on challenge mode, as most people do, I would recommend staying away from that, as the inconsistencies of scouting is one of the most fun challenges in this game. You'll notice that every skill rating is presented on a scale from 1 to 100. As you may recall from the last video, you can set this scale at 1 to 10, 1 to 100 adjusted, or 1 to 100 real when creating your new association. We'll be using a 1 to 100 adjusted scale, which I recommend for anyone who wants the most detailed and nuanced scale by which to judge players, but this is an entirely personal preference and won't affect the way your players perform on the court. There are a few other factors that affect a player's on-court performance that I briefly want to mention before diving into skill ratings. One is a player's size. As we switch the roster page from View Ratings to View Bio, keep in mind that a player like SHAWN, who stands at just 6'1", will play much differently than someone like Chris Salvi, who stands at 6'10". A player's size generally isn't as important as their ratings, but it can affect how their ratings apply to what they're being asked to do on the court. Another thing to consider is a player's floor range and ball actions by percentage. Let's take a closer look at SHAWN player profile. As you can see, he tends to take roughly 60% of his shots in the mid-range, while 35% of his shots come from outside, and just 5% are in the post. Below that, you'll notice that a whopping 98% of his shot attempts will come off the jump shot, while he looks to drive just 2% of the time with the ball in his hands. That not only affects his style of play, but also how his skill ratings will apply to his game, as we'll discuss in a moment. Another key factor is a player's proficiency in various offensive and defensive sets. While this won't affect a player's ratings or shooting profile, it'll certainly impact how effective they are when running each of these various sets and how often they're in the right position to score, grab a rebound, or defend their matchup. So even if one player is more skilled, they may struggle to outperform a teammate with higher proficiency in the sets that your team likes to run. You can see a full breakdown of every player's proficiency in various sets on the strategy screen, which we'll detail in a future video. Let's return to the rating screen and take a closer look at each individual skill rating in the order they appear from the top of the screen. The first rating is inside shooting, or field goal inside as shown on this screen, which determines a player's ability to make shots from inside the paint. This rating works hand in hand with a player's post-floor range and drive ball action to determine their overall ability to score near the basket. A player with a very high inside shooting rating may not actually be an effective inside scorer if they never get shots in the post or drive to the basket. In that case, the high rating would indicate that they're efficient on the few times they do get those shots, but can't be relied upon to get those looks often. As you can see here, our top inside scorers are our power forwards and centers, which is to be expected. It's not uncommon to see ratings as high as 100 for inside scoring, but as we mentioned, you'll need a player looking for these shots or an offense that generates those looks to fully take advantage. Outside shooting, or field goal jumper as shown here, determines a player's ability to make three-point shots as well as their ability to make shots between the paint and three-point line. This combined rating is affected by a player's typical shot distribution that we saw earlier. So if a player is an above-average mid-range shooter, but rarely attempts shots from outside, they may struggle to make three-pointers, even with a high outside shooting rating. As an example, let's take a closer look at Bernard O'Neal. He has a strong outside shooting rating at 80, but a closer look at his floor range shows that 91% of his looks come from the mid-range, while he attempts outside shots just 1% of the time. So we can expect O'Neal to be a deadly mid-range shooter, but he likely won't be a true stretch big all the way out to the three-point line. As you might have guessed, a player's free throw rating determines how effective they are when shooting free throws. Typically, guards will shoot better from the free throw line than big men, but this team is full of lousy free throw shooters at every position. This rating really comes into play against aggressive defenses that foul a lot and in the final minutes of a game, when missed free throws can often swing a result. You may want to consider benching a poor free throw shooter in the final minute or two if you have a suitable replacement at that position. Scoring is one of the most important and misunderstood ratings in the game. This rating is a measure of a player's ability to generate their own shots and put the ball in the basket. It has nothing to do with whether a player scores in an efficient manner. It's simply a measure of his ability to score. Players with a high scoring rating will take more shots than other players on average and have the ability to create shots for themselves at a higher percentage. A player with a low scoring rating might be an excellent shooter, but they only get limited attempts because they can't create for themselves at a very high rate. Conversely, a player with a high scoring rating but low shooting ratings may force inefficient shots and finish with a high point per game average while actually hurting your team's offensive efficiency. Let's take another look at our friend Sean Bush. While his 85 outside shooting rating is among the best on the team, Bush's 10 scoring rating is among the worst. He also has a 10 rating in passing and a 28 rating in ball handling, which means that we shouldn't expect Bush to have the ball in his hands very often, and he's unlikely to be able to create his own shot even when he does. So even though he has one of the best shooting ratings on the team, he'll be very reliant on his teammates to set him up because of his low scoring rating. Don't be discouraged if your entire roster is full of players with a low scoring rating, as is the case for this team. That's pretty typical, especially at a small school. That doesn't mean your players can't score. It just means they'll struggle to create shots for themselves, which could mean finding the right lineup combinations or offensive sets to put your players in the best position to score. Speaking of which, passing helps determine how often a player receives the ball and how effective they are at setting up their teammates to score. Players with a high passing rating are more likely to receive the ball as part of the normal course of the offense because they're much more likely to do something good with it, such as making the right pass, getting an assist, or not turning the ball over, whereas players with a low passing rating are less likely to receive the ball unless it's for a shot attempt. The passing rating also determines how likely it is that a player can set up their teammate for an immediate shot attempt, as opposed to a pass that leaves their teammate unable to shoot or forced to create their own shot. As you'd expect, point guards, and guards in general, tend to have the highest passing ratings on any given team, though an elite passing center or swingman can often be the centerpiece of an elite offense, depending on what type of offensive set you like to run. As you can see, this team is gifted with good passers at nearly every position, which can make for a very efficient offense when coached properly. Ball handling determines a player's ability to handle the ball efficiently and effectively. Players with low ball handling ratings are much more likely to have the ball stolen or commit an unforced turnover, and they're less likely to be able to drive past a defender. This rating is especially important to pay attention to when using players out of position, or when your offensive scheme puts them in spots they aren't normally comfortable with. The offensive and defensive rebounding ratings are pretty self-explanatory, as these determine how effective a player is at grabbing rebounds on both ends of the court. Big men tend to have the highest offensive and defensive rebounding rates, but don't discount the benefit of having a guard or small forward with a high rebounding rate, especially if you tend to play a zone on defense or stretch the floor on offense. Defensive ability is a key rating that determines a player's ability to succeed on defense in a number of ways. Players with a high defensive ability are better at staying with their assignment on defense, stopping their man on drives, preventing their man from getting a shot off, taking charges, and recognizing when to play help defense. This rating does not impact a player's shot blocking or stealing abilities. It's strictly a measure of playing sound defense. I can't overstate how important this rating is to the success of any player or team. While this rating tends to be more important in man-to-man defense than zone defense, Having even one poor defender on the court at any given time, man or zone, could leave your team vulnerable to getting attacked at that spot on the court. So it's important to consider this rating for every player in your rotation. The shot blocking and stealing ratings reflect the ability of the player to perform those particular tasks, whether it be properly timing jumps to block shots, or having the ability to jump passes for steals or quick hands to swipe a live dribble. Players with high shot blocking or stealing ratings could be terrible defenders overall, but perhaps they have great timing to block shots or are willing to gamble in passing lanes to steal passes. Just as a player might be a great defender, but does not generate a high rate of blocks or steals. The defensive ability rating is especially important for a shot blocker because blocks often come from help defense. So if your rim protector is poor at knowing when to help or being in position to help, he may not block as many shots as you'd expect, even with a high shot blocking rating. As is the case for many of the offensive ratings, sometimes it's just as important to be in the right position as it is to have the skill to execute in that spot. As an example, let's take a look at Matthew Cleveland. His 76 shot blocking rating is the highest on the team, and his 72 stealing rating is among the best too. Unfortunately, his defensive ability is just 35, and he has little to no proficiency in every defensive set. Because of that, it's unlikely that he'll block more shots than, say, Bernard O'Neal, who has a lower blocking rating but a higher defensive ability and much better proficiency on defense. Drawing fouls is a fairly self-explanatory rating that determines how often your players can get to the free throw line on offense. A high rating here pairs especially well with a high drive rate, as players who regularly drive into the lane are more likely to get fouled than those who are primarily jump shooters. Big men also tend to draw a lot of fouls, and you'll notice that the 4 highest marks for this team in drawing fouls all belong to big men. Conversely, the discipline rating helps determine how often a player commits fouls on both ends of the court. Players with a high discipline rating are less likely to commit defensive and offensive fouls, and are also more likely to tone down their efforts when they're in foul trouble, which helps them avoid picking up another foul and risk getting taken out of the game. That can be a double-edged sword, though, as players who are trying to avoid fouling may not be the most reliable defenders if the other team tries to attack them. Court IQ measures a player's ability to learn and become proficient in the offensive and defensive sets that their team is running. While all players gain proficiency in their team sets over time, a player with a high court IQ will more quickly understand their team's sets and will be more reliable on the court when those sets are called. Court IQ also plays a role in a player's positioning and decision-making on the court, which, as we've discussed, can help put them in more situations to be successful. This rating is often overlooked by veterans of the game, but a team full of players with high court IQ can be a force to be reckoned with. And finally, the athleticism rating determines a player's success rate when running press defenses. Players who are more athletic will be able to play press and trap defenses better, and they'll also be quicker to traps and passing lanes and more effective in converting steals on presses into fast break opportunities. So what does it all mean? One of the core elements of this game and all Draft Day Sports titles is the ability to win with any style. That said, there are a few traditional archetypes that fit not only this game, but basketball teams in general. Most CB22 veterans look for point guards with high passing, ball handling, and stealing ratings, which are often the areas in which incoming recruits at the point guard position grade out the highest. Shooting guards and small forwards often have the best scoring ratings on the team, which means it's even more important to find a wing with a good defensive ability too, to guard elite scorers on opposing teams. You'll often find that your best outside shooters are your point guards, shooting guards, and small forwards, and they tend to be the most athletic as well. Big men tend to post the highest marks in offensive and defensive rebounding, as well as blocking and inside shooting. These players will often take a higher percentage of their shots from the post too, which, as we've learned, can be crucial for making the most out of a high inside shooting rating. And all players benefit from having high ratings in court IQ, defense, discipline, and athleticism, especially if you're running a zone. Some coaches prioritize these ratings more than others, and that can largely depend on what types of sets you run on offense and defense. We'll dive into those further in a future video, but for now, if you're new to the game, I'd recommend focusing on scoring, passing, and defense, while securing at least 1 or 2 players with high ratings in inside shooting, outside shooting, and rebounding to help fill out the rest of your rotation. And just like that, you've learned everything you need to know about how skill ratings work and how to apply them to your coaching career. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to check out our previous episode on getting started with Draft Day Sports College Basketball 2022, and consider subscribing to our YouTube and Twitch channels to stay up to date on all things Wolverine Studios, including future episodes of Draft Day Academy and our other video series. You can find us across our many social media channels, including Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, Discord, Slack, Reddit, and the original Wolverine Studios forums, where you can interact with other community members, join online leagues, and potentially win free games and merchandise through our community giveaways. Also, be sure to tell us your thoughts on this video and anything else you want to see in the comments below. Thanks for watching.